Hi guys, welcome to Product Circle. This is our platform where we get product owners, product managers, agile coaches, delivery leads, anyone who's basically involved in a digital product team together to be able to engage and I suppose listen to some awesome talks as well. Those of you who haven't been to any of our events before, welcome. It's nice to have you along. Those of you who have been to one of our events before, welcome to a brand new way of doing things. I really wanted to extend my thanks firstly to the guys from Pusher. We really wouldn't be able to do it without them. Woodrow Mercer, as a technical recruitment business, has around 8 different meetups, and Pusher has been getting increasingly involved with how we can engage with the community, record the events and share them on YouTube afterwards. Obviously, doing things like a live stream really means that, we're able to reach a bigger audience. Some of you guys I know I've spoken to are on the other side of the world. So, it's great to be able to sort of spread our wings a little bit. And, what could be seen as a very sort of negative time for everyone, we're able to, still get engaged and, be sort of prevalent in the digital products community. With regards to the event tonight, we are going to be hearing from 2 awesome speakers, both based in the UK. We're going to be hearing from Zara Powell, who is a client delivery lead with Zone. So Zone is actually where we were due to be hosting this event tonight. And I think there's a few people online here with us that do work there. So if you do have any questions throughout the event, then please, just fire away in the comments. You can get just as engaged as you could, maybe even more so than you could at an event. And, one of the guys from Zone or, Zara herself will be able to answer any of your questions, before, during and after her talk. Hopefully you can all see and hear me okay. It's probably something I should have mentioned at the start, but I should have flagged that by now. The second speaker that we'll be hearing from is Zara, Inkpen. She's an agile delivery lead with Carta, who have recently just gone into a merger with the app business. So you might recognize either of those names, but I'm sure Sarah can fill you in a little bit more. So these talks are going to be, something that, hopefully you guys are all going to find really interesting, regardless of where you are, whether you're having a breakfast right now or whether you're having your dinner. But really what we wanted to do is just be able to bring people together in a time which is, obviously not ideal for anyone, but, really keep that community engagement going, get some good content going and some good conversations happening. I am also interested to hear how you guys are finding working at home at the moment. For me in particular, it's pretty good, to be honest. I'm pretty lucky. I live in Blackheath, and we've been very spoilt by the weather so far this week in London. So it's getting slightly warmer. What could be a very bleak situation is actually quite nice. We've got backyards that we can take a walk in every now and again. So it's nice to get out there and get a bit of fresh air every now and again. But yeah, how are you guys getting on? How's productivity? How are you being able to get in contact with your team? So keen to hear from you guys as to how everyone's doing. Welcome to our event, and the next the next person that you'll hear from will be one of our presenters. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments section, and please do just leave some feedback afterwards, after the event. If you or during the event, feel free to message me privately. I'll share my my LinkedIn profile and my email address. So if anyone has any comments or wants to get engaged in a future meetup, they're going to be remote for the foreseeable. I think we're going to still try and do them every month, but they're going to be remote for a while. So fingers crossed we can really sort of grow off this platform and reach a wide number of people. So do let me know if you have any feedback or anything that we can do to improve, because we are just keen to do it all for you guys. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to our first speaker. Enjoy.
So I'm going to talk to everyone today about getting the right products and services to market. And so just a very quick intro to who am I. So my name's Zara Powell. My background's very much within Agile delivery, from consulting in not-for-profits through to parachuting in and working in financial services in the City of London. Always very much working with multidisciplinary product teams, supporting getting products and services out to market, but also coaching and educating in ways of working and prioritisation. I'm very passionate about diversity inclusion in the workplace and really proud to recently have been named as part of the Tech Women 100 list. As you can see on the slide, I also very proudly have a 2-year-old spaniel called Ralph, but more seriously, I'm a client delivery lead at Zone. So who are Zone? Zone are a customer experience agency who generate value for businesses by creating transformative experiences. We've got offices both in Bristol and King's Cross, and I'm really fortunate to work with lots of really cool and exciting brands, many of which you can see up on the screen now. I'm really privileged and fortunate enough to actually have worked with a number of those brands you can see on the screen over the last 3 years whilst I've been working at Zone. So in terms of my talk then, talking to you about getting products and services to market, the more important question is actually around how to get the right products and services to market. So how do I do that? So often the focus is around getting something out of the door into customers quickly, and while speed is of course important, actually ensuring that you're putting something out there that is valuable and what your customer actually needs is even more important. And so what I'm going to spend the next sort of 5-10 minutes talking to you about is just that, using a couple of examples along the way. I guess from a Zone perspective, what does that look like at a very zoomed out view? We work to help diagnose any areas in which we can go after things. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? And we do that diagnosis often through rapid immersion workshops, trying to help understand client issues and collaboratively design projects together. And then we can tackle them often using our accelerator model. The accelerators are designed to conceive, test and validate digital strategies and transformation initiatives to help launch products and services and getting them to market. It's very much a multidisciplinary exercise focusing on moving from idea and getting that into market whilst validating that hypothesis and idea along the way using Agile and lean methodologies. That then can feed into larger scale transformative deliveries and programs of work. So that's great. That's really, really cool. And that's often how we work. But I guess how do we apply it to real life? What does that mean for anyone listening today? So as I mentioned, the best place to start is to actually think about what is the problem you're trying to solve and identifying and understanding that. This can sometimes mean taking a step backwards in understanding the why, rather than focusing on a solution or an idea that you may already have. Whilst you may end up back there, there could also be lots of other different solutions out there which may be more focused on your client customer experiences. It might be more suitable for your business needs, or may well be more technically feasible or scalable. So it's worth just taking that moment to pause and understand the problem you're trying to solve. To try and bring this to life a little bit more, I'm actually going to use a project that I've recently finished working on for PRS, for music, the Performing Rights Society, and just show how we applied some of that thinking and logic along the way. So as I said, the Performing Rights Society for music, they ensure that members and licensees get paid their royalties as they should. Basically the challenge that we were personally working with them on trying to solve was around how do they bring their M brand, which currently had been sitting separately to the PRS website, and bring that in. So the M brand was a print magazine going out to members, and an unsupported standalone platform as well. And so the challenge we had was around how to bring that all together. So in terms of getting started, for us, it's really important about applying a one-team approach, and in anything that you do, I'd really encourage this across the whole process to encourage transparency and to help build close working relationships. This is exactly what we did when working with PRS. We had an amazing product owner provided by them, and we worked really closely both with developers from Zone and PRS working together as one. In addition, we had UX design and content, working really closely with the design teams and stakeholders on their side. Once, this is super important because it's really important to apply a multidisciplinary approach, because it means that you're balancing the thinking. So it's not just focusing on the creative or the tech, it's about bringing those needs together. Once you've understood the problem, it's really important to understand what good looks like and what is enough. So defining what that MVP looks like, how are you going to get there, and ensuring that you follow an iterative approach to allow for continuous delivery of value. It's also super important to value on just enough. There's lots of perfectionists out there, and whilst that's absolutely fine, striving towards perfection can take a lot of time and effort, which ultimately leads to spending lots more money. And so identifying what's good enough to get out there, to get that data and insight, and then allow you to iterate and continue to expand on and enhance as you go. And one way of looking at this and thinking about it is the known sort of concept around thinking about a testable, usable, and then lovable approach. So just sharing here a slide around bringing that to life a little bit more. So thanks to my lovely colleague Jess, who previously pulled this together. But if you think literally simply in terms of these emojis, from a testable canoe through to a usable sailing boat through to a very lovable speedboat, and following that concept, it still works, but it's how you build and enhance and make things better and better. So in terms of the earliest testable product, so using the concept of what that may look like, it's really important to think about identifying the highest value opportunities as a team. And then working collaboratively to brainstorm solutions using tools such as Design Studio. So what you can see on the screen now is actually a snippet of a Design Studio that we ran. And then validating, so taking those ideas that have come through there and validating and testing those hypotheses, often using sort of either sketches or low fidelity prototypes using tools such as Figma. This allows for design thinking and validation for concepts for delivery. It's really important, as I hope it's starting to come through, that everything that you do should be validated with customers, key business stakeholders and markets, ensuring continuous validation. This is something that we did throughout, whether it be through using optimal sort to help identify the categories for content, right the way through to working with the board and key stakeholders when thinking about things like the navigation of the site and where M should sit, through to how to display the distribution amounts so that members knew if and how much and when they could expect those amounts to land. This helps then tie into the earliest usable product, working very much as part of the Agile team. In this instance, we were using Scrum. We can then start scoping out and estimating the work, helping to both form but also refine our backlogs. We can see on the screen here an example mapping exercise or a mini amigo session. This is just driven from BDD, business-driven development, whereby the teams work together as a multidisciplinary unit to break down the work into understandable chunks, understanding any questions or unknowns and breaking those out along the way. And from there, executing and delivering upon what that usable product may well be through incremental releases. And in this particular instance, over the 12 weeks, we were releasing fortnightly, which then winds up with sort of your earliest lovable product. So for us, you can see on the screen is a screenshot of what that ended up looking like. So you can see the M magazine integrated with the PRS for Music site. But it's also super important that you can measure the impact and learn from that. So as I say, it's very much an iterative process. This should be powered by data, fully leveraging insights to help decision make, to also then help inform with future ideas. So in this instance, potentially exploring personalization. So in a nutshell, within 12 weeks, the team audited and migrated around 9,000 articles, developed a brand new design system, continuously understood and validated needs throughout, whilst creating a new area of the site. So whilst that's a real life example of something that we've done recently, or I've done recently, I guess what are the key takeaways for you? So what do you need? What do you need to know? What do you need to understand to apply this way of thinking moving forward? So a few things that will help you with success are to have a fully empowered product owner to help unblock barriers and help sign things off and make key program decisions. Any existing research, understanding any key dependencies, whether that be parallel work streams or otherwise, but also the constant collaboration between the teams, remembering to continuously test, validate and iterate upon that, and holding yourselves accountable to the testable, usable and lovable concept. But more broadly than that, I also wanted to leave you with a couple of tools and tips that you can take away back to your teams and give a try as well. So there are 3 really key and interesting activities and areas which I wanted to share, many of which you're probably familiar with already. The first, I guess, is the opportunity canvas. So Canvas is a really great tool to help facilitate conversations, particularly when starting engagements. And they're really great because you can continue to refer back to them. Often really good to use tools such as Miro, particularly if any of the teams are remote. But from an opportunity canvas perspective, it really allows to help drive discussion around everything from your vision through to what the opportunities are, what may help get you there, what may hold you back and restrict you, and also what does success look like, what are those metrics. The second tool or activity I'd like to leave you with is Design Studio. So I referenced them earlier on in the presentation. Design Studio is a multidisciplinary collaborative workshop, and it basically enables the team to have a shared understanding of a problem and generating a diverse set of solutions to try and solve that. It's super important that it's multidisciplinary and you've got lots of different brains and ways of thinking in those sessions. A few hints and tips on how to run a successful design studio would be to assign a design studio owner. So that person should be empowered to and understand how to answer any questions that may arise throughout, and really understand that problem inside out. As I mentioned, making sure it's multidisciplinary, and also making sure that you do something with it. So once you've got the results off the back of the design studio, actually then turning those into coherent ideas so that you can then go ahead and test. And finally, I thought it was a really nice thing that we do both with our clients but also internally as well is hackathons. So this doesn't have to be just a completely tech thing, but actually anyone can get involved, from whether you're from the business, whether you're creative or technical or otherwise. When you've got a problem that you know you want to solve, it's a really nice thing to go after and bring people together. If possible, if you have any analytics that support that, then obviously that's really brilliant to bring those along to then start brainstorming ideas as part of multidisciplinary teams. Personally, I think treats and music often help with hackathons to keep the mood and spirit going, but they are optional. And then off the back of that, you're able to test your hypothesis, and if any of those are validated, then try them out. This is something that we've done with one of our clients, whereby we did a hackathon and we brainstormed a load of ideas and prioritised one to try out. And through some guerrilla testing that we did with real users, we were able to bring to life the concept of photo registration. This was rolled out to one market in 8 weeks and then followed out to the rest of the markets beyond that. And I think it's just a really nice way of bringing to life how great a hackathon can be, because sometimes what may seem like a pipe dream or just a nice creative exercise as a bit of a fresh way of thinking really can lead to some of the best and most successful ideas. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. I appreciate that this was supposed to be a talk that was supposed to be done in person, and so I hope that it's been easy enough to follow along to the presentation today. I've left my email address as part of this as well, so if you've got any additional questions or you wanted to follow up, then please do drop me a line and I'd be more than happy to have a chat and go from there. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it was helpful, and all the best. Thanks.
Hi there. I'm going to talk to you a bit about how to lead a room, mastering the art of meaningful meetings. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Zara Inkpen. I am an Agile delivery lead and I work for Carta Create Europe. So Carta is an agency that delivers end-to-end digital services, and we work in consultancy, we work with designing and creating digital products and services, and we also work very heavily in marketing as well. I've worked personally at Carta Create for almost 4 years as an Agile delivery lead, and in that time I've worked in a variety of projects from like transport to e-commerce, finance, you name it. And I've also worked on a variety of team sizes, so down from really small 2-3 person teams up to much larger scale, like 40 plus people program level roles. So as you can imagine, in that time I have seen my fair share of meetings. I've participated in a lot of them, I have led a lot of them, and over the time I have picked up on a few things that I think really help make meetings more productive and successful. So, how to lead a room. So, regardless of your role, I'm sure a lot of you have been in meetings before. I'm sure a lot of you may have led meetings before, and I'm sure you may have seen, like me, a lot of these meetings be a little bit frustrating or a waste of time at some points, but also seen times when they've been incredibly successful and productive. So we're going to be trying to focus on how you can make your meetings err more towards the incredibly productive and successful side and avoid some potential pitfalls. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I mean by leading the room. And this can be, you can lead the room in a board meeting, in a workshop, in a one-to-one. It really doesn't matter the scale of the meeting. There are some traits that can be helpful across all these areas. And so much of what can make a meeting successful can really be determined by how you plan to lead it, thinking about whether you'll be leading from the front of the room or whether you'll be leading from the back of the room, whether you're going to choose to be a presenter or be a facilitator. And that's really where I'm going to be focusing the outcome of this talk, by focusing on choosing between being a presenter and a facilitator. So, a little bit about the agenda for today. So I'm going to be taking you through the difference between being a presenter and a facilitator. And then we're going to be talking a bit about when to be a presenter or a facilitator, a bit about being both roles, and then some tips and tricks. Cool. So the difference between a presenter and a facilitator. So in my mind, the difference between a presenter and a facilitator really comes down to the direction of information. So with a presenter usually teaches or provides information to a group. So as a presenter, you'll be standing there and you'll be pushing that information. So the direction is a push to a group of people. Whereas a facilitator guides others to expose or generate information that they might already have. And so the role of a facilitator is to pull that information from others. So presenter pushes, a facilitator pulls. But we're going to dive down a bit deeper into what makes a good presenter and what makes a good facilitator. So being a presenter. So on this slide, I'm taking you through what a presenter does broadly. So a presenter conveys knowledge to others and does this by educating an audience on something that they don't know or something that they want to know more about. A presenter inspires change. So you can inspire change by relating a narrative or a message that can act as a call to action for those people who are listening. And a presenter can also be there to provide perspective. So playing back information to clarify an understanding or approach. Cool. But what makes a good presenter? So in my time, I've watched a lot of speakers, been to a few conferences, and there have been some traits that I've noticed and good practices that I've noticed that really help make those presentations really stand out. And so I'll take you through a few of those right now. So a good presenter tends to be very clear. And by this, I mean stating really clearly the outcomes and takeaways up front. So making sure the audience really understands what they're going to be achieving and how what you've said is going to aid them with like the key takeaways. And you should always relate content back to those key takeaways, so it's really tangible what the audience is learning for them, and they can root that for themselves. At my company, even, we have a principle which says that we should always zoom out, and this means stepping back from diving into the details and saying, here is the context, here's what we're trying to achieve, and that makes it really easy for a group to know where they're going and get on board with what you're talking about. So then we think about a good presenter being focused. So a good presenter tends to provide an agenda up front and really stick to it, and really convey their points succinctly, and not going off on tangents, not spending time on points that don't relate back to their original message. A good presenter is engaging, so bringing personality or novelty to a presentation. And by that, I don't mean being a performer and doing crazy tricks and being a comedian, but just not being homogenous in your format or monotone in your delivery. So we always try to change up how we present information to others, try and keep people, bring them in and put them on a journey. Also, a good presenter should connect to their audience. So keep eye contact, speak to people. There are lots of, in the world, like a lot of tips that say, if you're nervous, look above people. But that can help for your nerves, but it really can remove you from the situation, and it can make it harder for an audience to maintain investment in what you're talking about. But over and above everything, to stay engaging, I think the main thing for me is that making time to answer questions from your audience. So, for example, I went to an Agile convention very recently, and I noticed that the talks that I got the most out of were the ones where I was able to put my hand up, ask questions, clarify what the person was talking about, ask further questions, probe deeper. And the talks that I came away thinking, that was a bit... were ones that I was spoken at for like a solid 30 minutes, and then at the end the person walked off the stage and I was like, oh, I don't know what you were talking about, I wish I could have asked you that question. And over and above everything else, what makes a good presenter is staying relevant. So having a message or a narrative that's pertinent for the people who are listening to you, and providing context and examples that really ground what you're saying in reality, so people can take those learnings and really identify it in their own particular lives. Cool. So that's being a presenter. Now we're going to dive a bit into being a facilitator. So what does it mean to facilitate? What do facilitators do? So a facilitator is there to enable outcomes, and they do this by maintaining focus and guiding discussions to make sure it's moving towards a session goal. So if you're running a meeting, I'm sure you have an outcome in mind, I'm sure the group has an outcome in mind, and your role as a facilitator is to nudge people on course, make sure they're sticking to the North Star that they've set themselves and what they want to achieve. A facilitator is also there to keep balance. So a facilitator should be a neutral party in these meetings. They should be there to minimize the bias by acting as a neutral voice, balancing discussions, and that can be maintaining a neutral perspective in yourself, making sure that you're not trying to weigh in, but also making sure that those in the room are not biasing towards one avenue or another, not speaking over each other either. Also, a facilitator is there to reduce risk. And so building psychological safety is really important for this, as it allows people to raise issues without fear of rebuke. Cool. So what makes a good facilitator? So a good facilitator, from my experience, always prepares. That's not to say that presenters don't prepare. In fact, to take into account, most traits that will help a presenter will help a facilitator, and vice versa, but these are the key points that I want to focus in for that differentiate each role and what really helps most with each role. So a good facilitator really prepares up front. They will set up the environment and they will think about how they can sustain energy and engagement from the group. So with sessions, you don't want them to be low in energy because people become very unproductive. People start sitting back, start sitting on their phones, not paying attention. That's not what you want. So you're thinking about it beforehand and creating an environment. For example, how you arrange the chairs can be a small thing, but very, very important. Keeping it in a circle so people aren't blocked off. That's something that can really help. Another thing is making sure you create a format that allows all voices in the room to be heard. So that lends back to the helping keep balance and minimizing bias. So if you create a format and think about who's going to be in the room, have you got loud people? Have you got quiet people? Have you got incredibly opinionated people that you might need help letting know that they need to share the forum with other people? You can plan for that, and you can create a format and a structure that will help them listen and help support other people and lift them up to be able to contribute too. So a good facilitator also guides. So by guiding, this really lends back to the thinking about the outcomes of meetings and nudging people to get to the session outcome. So taking tangential conversations offline, making sure you're holding people accountable to meeting rules, for example, like no devices, and holding people accountable to the time boxes that you've set. So by keeping time boxes strict, it means that you can keep the session moving, you don't get stuck on a conversation, you get to that action, that outcome that you were setting out to achieve from the beginning, which is useful for everybody. A good facilitator also constantly questions. And by constantly questions, they are asking open questions to progress a discussion, not closed yes or no questions, one-word answers. By having open questions, you enable people in the group to start pulling that information from themselves and get invested in what they are trying to achieve in that meeting. It also means that instead of potentially asking a dichotomous question of, is it this or is it this? It might be a third option that you may not have thought of, and you can really draw that from a group by asking open questions. Asking questions is also helpful for challenging assumptions to provide clarity and digging deep into an issue. For example, I'm sure a lot of you may have been in a workshop or a session where someone's made a broad sweeping statement and said, this is the way it is, and everyone nods along, and then you move on, and then you realise that actually we didn't really understand what the next steps were from that. We don't know where to go. So as a facilitator, even if it feels like an obvious question, going, what does that mean? Why are we doing that? And get people to fully explain themselves. Because even if one person in the room doesn't understand, that's one person who's going to go away and potentially do the wrong thing or feel confused, and you just don't want that. And over and above everything else, a good facilitator listens. So it's really important as a facilitator to listen to all of the group, making sure that everybody's on the same page. Everyone understands the instructions, everyone's understanding each other. But it's also important to listen to see if the session is going the way it needs to go. I've spoken about outcomes a lot. You should be always listening to make sure that the group is moving towards that outcome. And if they're not, being able to adapt. You may have prepared a plan, but if that plan isn't working, the outcome hasn't changed, the plan needs to change. So listening out for when that needs to happen and being able to improvise around that is very important. Cool. So let's talk a bit about when to be either a presenter or a facilitator. So we know a bit about what they are, now when to be one or the other. So as we've mentioned, we've spoken about the difference between being a presenter and a facilitator being related to whether you're pushing or pulling information. But what about the choice of when to be either role? When should you be pushing that information? When should you be pulling that information? So the choice of which role to perform depends on the group's current knowledge or the outcome that they're trying to achieve. So, with all good things, I have drawn up some quadrants to help explain. So from left to right is what we've been talking about previously. So that's the information direction. from push to pull. I've added another axis from top to bottom, which is the group knowledge. So whether a group has knowledge or whether the group needs knowledge. So let's go through these quadrants. So as discussed, a presenter is very much about pushing that information, but you want to be pushing that information when the group needs or wants it. So that is the best time to be a presenter. The group is there listening to you, they're engaged, they want you to tell them what you know. However, if the group already has that information, but they don't want that information and you're pushing it at them, it can come across as a bit of a know-it-all. It can come across quite egocentric and might not get to the right conclusion. It might create some negative opinions potentially if you're pushing information at people who already have it, already don't want it. But if a group already has information, this is the time to potentially be a facilitator and pull that information from them, to get them to expose the information. And so if they have it, you're pulling it from them, that's helping them generate ideas, come to some interesting creative solutions, and that's when a facilitator is needed. However, if you're pulling information when a group actually needs information, that is frustrating. So trying to coach people to an answer that they don't have is never going to work out well for anyone in the room. So I'm going to give you a few examples about these things. So examples of being either a presenter or a facilitator, the good and the bad, and when we should be doing them. So I'm going to give you some examples more specifically related to projects rather than conferences, just because I feel that I'm making an assumption that is where the most of you will be coming from. So for a presenter, being a presenter is great for example, project showcases or sprint reviews, because it really gives you an opportunity to give that information, provide that information to excite and inform your stakeholders of the team's progress. So that's a good opportunity to push information that you have. Like, here's how well we're doing. Isn't that great? It's bad, however, when you're trying to maybe mediate a conversation. For example, maybe if your team, two members of your team are struggling, finding it hard to come to a consensus, if you then sit there and present your opinion at them, that's not going to help, because it's going to block them from sharing their own views, and it's going to end up leading to no kind of resolution. It's just going to be you talking at them when they need to be exposing their own information and talking to each other. So for a facilitator, a facilitator is great for like coaching and line management. So that can really empower individuals to take control of their own development and self-guide themselves. So you asking open questions: where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself? All those cliche coaching questions, but they are really helpful because they help that person engage and bring the information from themselves and really guide themselves. But being a facilitator is bad for when you're trying to maybe manage a difficult client conversation or update. So for example, if I was in, or you were in your team was running behind and you needed to update your stakeholder of, oh no, we might be a bit delayed by this amount of time. You don't want to be facilitating that conversation because it can really reduce the client's confidence that you're in control of what's going on. And that's a time when they really want you to be saying, here's where we are, here's what we're going to do. And that's not to say that you won't ask them questions and get them to help clarify and ask their needs, but in that stage, your role really should be presenter, because you need to give them some confidence and information about what's going to happen next. But I've talked about being a presenter or a facilitator. It's quite dichotomous. It's like at the moment I presented in either one or the other kind of scenario, but there are definitely many scenarios when it really helps to be both. And the example I'm going to give here is retrospectives and workshops. So flip-flopping between being a presenter and facilitator is really useful in those scenarios because it helps to create a learning environment. So you can as a presenter, show people how to do something, tell people how to get there, but then you facilitate to enable people to then learn by doing and start creating their own actions and for it to be drawn from them. And so that's a good time to be moving between those two roles. And it doesn't have to be one then the other. It can change as it goes. A little bit more about being both roles. So why should you be both? And here are my top 3 reasons why you should be both a presenter and a facilitator. So it can support learning. It provides people with the tools they need to learn by doing. So you're showing them how, you're giving them instructions. Here's how you can help yourself, and then leaving it to them to then teach, learn, and self-generate those solutions and actions between each other. It will also be able to create investment when you're being able to occupy both roles, because you'll be able to encourage contribution to ideas, and that will enable more consensus and more buy-in. So people are more likely to buy into ideas that they were involved in creating or influencing. And in situations, for example, retrospectives or more hands-on workshops where you're trying to come to a creative solution, you want actions to come out of that will be carried forward. And people are going to carry forward actions that they feel like they've created, that they've had a hand in, and they'll feel more empowered to take those away, and they're more likely to get action faster, better, and come to a better outcome and solution. And lastly, it can drive innovation. So being able to flip-flop between both roles means you can promote a more diverse range of input to inspire more creative solutions. So by it not just being your voice, but helping it be the voice of others feeding into an idea, you can really drive that creativity, that collaboration that you may need. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about tips and tricks for balancing these roles, because it can be easy to be one thing or another, but changing between two of them, it can be a challenge in terms of mindset and also understanding for a group. So what I'm going to tell you are my 3 top tips and tricks for how to balance these. Admittedly, a lot of these are more specifically when you're physically in the room, which, given our current situation, is a little bit frustrating, but you can always implement these when we're allowed to be back in the room together again. And as well as this, I will be peppering in some other tips and tricks for how you can then translate these to being remote. So you can still present or facilitate remotely. I am currently presenting now, as you can see. So my first tip/trick is setting a base. This first one isn't so much of an issue when working remotely, as there'll be equal screen space if you're dialing in to a presentation or a workshop. But setting a base, you can cue your role change. So if you're changing between both roles, a presenter tends to stand at the front of the group, where the group can look and listen to them. A facilitator will tend to stand to the side or the back of the room, which really forces the group to look and listen to each other and pull that information from each other. So setting a base, this can be really useful just in general as a tip. If you place your materials, your laptop, your notes in the place that you intend to stand and ground yourself, it means you can walk away and return to it. It gives you a place to center yourself. But what can cue your role change, even in your own mindset, to help you mentally switch in role, and also to cue to others in the room that you're changing in role, is to actively move that base to cue that change. So for example, if I was running a workshop, I might initially start placing my base at the front of the group and present to them what we're going to be doing. And then once I've switched into that facilitator role, I would usually pick up my notes or my laptop if I can, move it to the side of the room or the back of the room, and make sure I'm rooted there. And that helps me disengage from the presenter mindset, and it also removes me from being the focal point of the room, so people aren't automatically looking to the front, trying to get me to push that information again. They can start pulling information from each other. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, altering the group's focus. So you can really lead where people look. So changing specifically from a presenter to a facilitator can be a bit harder than the other way around. I find it easier to step from facilitator to a presenter role because it's easier to go and stand at the front. Whereas switching to being to the side or back, people already associate you with pushing information and may continue to look to you to provide that information to them. So you can use social cues to help direct the group's attention back towards each other in that scenario. One tip that is really helpful for when you're trying to just make that switch is just to call it out explicitly. And this is helpful whether you're in person or whether you're remote and dialed in, is to just say, I'm not presenting anymore, I'm now facilitating. I won't be participating in this particular activity. I personally do this a lot during retrospectives after I've finished telling the group what activity they're going to be doing. If the group then starts trying to include me in those discussions, I'll be like, I am a facilitator, I am not participating. It can be a bit annoying, but it is helpful. So another thing to do is to change eye contact. So when questions that should be directed internally to the group are by proxy directed at you, people might automatically look to you while asking the question, as you've been the focal point when you've been presenting to them. One way to stop that from happening, to stop you from feeling like you have to answer and stop making them expect that you will be answering, is to change that eye contact with them. And I personally will, if someone directs a question at me, that isn't specifically at me but for everybody, I will look to other members of the group that I think would be more appropriate to answer, which that helps them direct their eye contact back to those people as well. As well as that, writing down notes of what people are talking about, that's helpful for facilitation anyway, because it helps give you something to refer back to help dig into questions. But it also means that while you're writing something down, people can't lock you into eye contact and force you to feel like you need to respond to their question immediately. Another trick for this is walking the room. And this is really helpful for making sure that you're not locked into that focal point. You're changing it up. You're able to blend into the back of the room, and it also gives you that real opportunity to, as we talked about before, in a facilitation capacity, to be able to listen to how people are getting on and circle the room, understand if people are understanding each other. Are they understanding the task at hand? And if they're not, you can then flip into that presenter role. If people are really stuck, briefly dip into that conversation and say, can I help you? Here is what you should be doing. And then stepping back and walking the room again. From a remote perspective, you can also, a way to keep yourself further back than when if you were presenting is to leave yourself on mute. If you don't need to be talking at that stage. And having being on mute is a cue in itself, if a remote one. Cool. So going to move on to the third and final tips and tricks and this is my personal favourite one, is that to remember it's not about you. The outcome is what's important. I've spoken about outcomes a lot, and I really do firmly believe that is the most important thing. So remembering that it's not about you. So in both roles, your attention should be on what the group needs. Whether you're pulling information, the real choice is about how the group sees their outcome. Where is the group knowledge at that time? When you're flip-flopping between both roles, it's when the group's knowledge is changeable, when they will sometimes have information, sometimes need information, and you will need to judge where they are in that moment. And something that can help with that is making sure you're introspecting first before you're responding. Asking yourself, am I the only one here who can provide this information? So whether people are struggling to come to a conclusion, are you really the person who needs to jump in? Or is there someone else in the group who can answer that question just as well? Or if people are really needing information from you, going, am I the only person? Yes, I am the only person who can provide that information. And then switching into that presenter role again. Another tip is to hold a short silence. So what I mean by this is to give some space for a group to come to the answer themselves. And I would recommend holding a silence just to the point where it's slightly uncomfortable. And then if no one jumps in, then you may need to switch back and give them more information. But often people wait for someone else to jump in. If you step back and leave it to be just that bit uncomfortable, and it does feel uncomfortable, you might get someone to have a really interesting perspective that they may have held back from waiting for someone else to talk. But don't let the silence go on for too long, because then that can really stall a discussion and it just ends up being slightly less productive. So you need to judge it. Don't get there until it's so uncomfortable that the silence and tumbleweeds fall everywhere. And last but not least, you need to be attending really closely to everybody in the room. So actively looking and listening to everybody, making sure that the group understands what they're trying to do. They understand each other, they understand the activity, they understand what you're saying, what you've said before, and that more than anything else, that they really are moving towards that outcome that they're trying to achieve. And this is applicable regardless of roles and whether you're remote or in person. Just remembering it's not about how you're coming across. It's not about what you wanted to say, your opinion necessarily. Even when you're presenting, it's about what does the group want? What does the group need in order to get to the outcome that we set out to achieve? So, in summary, how to lead a room. Making meetings more meaningful. So, we've spoken about choosing the role you use to lead a room plays a really important part in its success. So choosing whether to be at the front or the back, presenting or facilitating, or whether you need to be changing between those two because the group's needs are changeable. It's very important to make sure that you're getting to that successful meeting outcome and getting value and driving it forward. You should be able to understand whether you want to be pushing that information or pulling that information and paying attention to the group's needs and their outcome in order to do so. And balancing both those roles can get the most meaningful outcome of your outcome of the room. So in summary, to make your meetings more meaningful, to lead them effectively, think about who you're talking to and what they need and not about yourself. Cool. So thank you very much. I've been Sarah Inkpen, and I hope you're all staying well in these times we're having. So thank you, and goodbye.